I'm going to go ahead and get started with our introductions because I want to start by saying thank you to everyone who's joining us today from across the country and the world. I'm Alexander, and as CEO of Conscious Capitalism, Inc., I just so appreciate you taking the time to learn and grow in community with us today. Conscious capitalism is a philosophy that emphasizes the human nature of capitalism and business. It's a movement of business leaders around the world working to change the practice and perception of capitalism to elevate humanity. And Conscious Capitalism, Inc. is a nonprofit organization catalyzing that movement. We're offering this virtual gathering series as a way for the community to see the ways that conscious capitalism is taking shape in the leadership journeys of our network and the business practices of the members of our community. And so I not only hope you're enjoying the series, but I hope that you get a lot out of today's session, which I'm so excited for. As a few logistical points, we have 45 minutes today. It's going to begin with Shane sharing for about 35 minutes, but we're then going to transition to questions. So if at any point you have a question you want to ask him, please enter it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you have any technical questions or issues, please just email us, even during this, at info@consciouscapitalism.org. And without any further ado, it's really my honor to introduce Shane Jackson as our speaker today. He's the president of Jackson Healthcare, a billion-dollar privately held family of 16 healthcare staffing, search, and technology companies that are powered by over 1,500 associates. He's also the guiding force for Jackson Healthcare's mission of improving the delivery of patient care and the lives of everyone it touches, including the nonprofit world, which benefits from the company's Love Lifts community impact initiatives. He's a writer, a speaker, and has even chronicled his philosophy of workplace culture in his 2018 book, Fostering Culture, A Leader's Guide to Purposefully Shaping Culture. And even just beforehand, he was really giving a teaser for me about what he's gone through to prepare for this speak and share something with this community that I don't know if you've really shared with many others yet in reflecting on this year, Shane. So I'm really excited to hear from you, and I know that everyone else is. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom with the conscious capitalism community today.
Great. Well, thank you, Alexander. I appreciate the invitation and the introduction and all that. And just to start, for those of you who may be new to the conscious capitalism community or what it's about, I just really would encourage you to dive in. This has been a real just blessing for me in my life to be able to do this. And Conscious Capitalism does a lot of great events. The CEO Summit that's in Austin once a year has been just a really great resource for me. And so the organization's done a really good job with these virtual events this year. But frankly, I really hope that there's a time in the near future where we can get back to some of those in-person events, because I find them to be very valuable. And when back kind of, I guess, right before COVID, I got asked to speak at the CEO event that transitioned into this. So just frankly, for me, this is an incredible honor to be able to address this community. And so I'm really glad to be able to do that. I want to start just giving you a little bit of information about our company. We're not a consumer brand. Most people don't know who we are. And so just to kind of give you a little context, we're 20 years old. The company started in 2000 by my father. He invited me right when we were starting to come and help him launch the company as I was finishing grad school. As Alexander said, we are privately owned. We have no outside investors. We're in healthcare, as our name denotes. We are in the really cool business of making sure that people have access to care regardless of where they are. And we do that through a number of ways. We provide medical staff for different types of care providers all over the country, be it hospitals or clinics or urgent cares, or pretty much anywhere care is delivered. We provide staff. We have technology that we deliver as ways of doing that. We happen to be one of the largest providers of telemedicine in the country. We work in all 50 states. and have about a little over 7,500, approaching 10,000 actually now, clinicians that work for us around the country. And as you heard, about 1,500 what we call internal associates. We've been very fortunate to win a lot of awards, like I'm sure a lot of the other companies represented here, of best place to work and that sort of thing. But what I think one of the things that really makes us pretty unique is the purpose of our organization, the reason it exists. And as I tell every month when I speak in our new hire orientation, and I tell our new hires that I want them to understand that this company is a means to an end and not an end to itself. The reason this company exists is because for us, for me personally, I have not yet found a way better to live out my life mission of helping to impact the lives of other people. And that's why this company is here. And that manifests in some ways that are obvious, like some of the kind of philanthropic things we do. You heard Alexander mention Love Lifts and some of the things that we do there, which is a huge part of our daily activity. But it also manifests in ways that are less obvious, like how we deal with our customers and how we see the relationships we have with our associates and that sort of thing. And so as you can, probably guess, based on that kind of philosophy, we have what we think is a pretty unique culture. In 2014, my father was made the decision to move out of day-to-day operation of the company and pass that responsibility on to me. And during that time, I really went through a lot of just the thought around this topic of culture. And as I was approaching a leadership transition from the founder, and if you've been in a founder-led company, you realize what impact founder has on the culture of a company. But also, as we were experiencing tremendous growth, I really spent a lot of time considering how I could maintain, even grow, and enhance culture in that type of an environment. And so, as you heard, I wrote a book that I released a couple of years ago on culture. I speak on culture fairly regularly. And so it's something that we're very, very purposeful about in our company. I'm sure, like all of you could talk about, this year's been interesting, to say the least, and challenging. It's been that way for everyone. For us in healthcare, perhaps uniquely so. It really started for us in March. First of all, we were in the first quarter having the best quarter we've ever had. We had January, February, the best months we'd ever had, and then March hit. And for us, if you remember back then, one of the first things that happened was pretty much a national cancellation of elective surgeries. Well, surgery is a big part of healthcare. It's a big part of what we do. And so in mid-March, all of a sudden, we found ourselves sending literally thousands of our clinicians home, surgeons and anesthesiologists, and OR nurses and technicians, radiologists, and pretty much anyone that touched surgery, all of a sudden was done. And then that was followed up very, very shortly, almost concurrently, by these big surges of COVID cases. And certainly you guys remember all of this, everything that was happening in New York, to a lesser degree in places like Detroit, New Orleans, and Seattle, where we saw one of the first outbreaks. And for us here, we're based out of Atlanta. And there's a town called Albany, Georgia, which actually still is the fourth highest pro rata, per capita cases. It was a real hot spot, and so we got really deep, really quick into that work. We literally sent thousands of people around the country to work in these COVID hotspots and to work with COVID patients. We were contracted by the state of Georgia to be kind of the hub to coordinate their clinical response around the state, but literally sent hundreds of people into New York and lots of other places. I'm sure a lot of you know a doctor or a nurse or have read the stories and just, you know, understand a little bit of what it was like, especially in the spring for our frontline medical staff and clinical staff. And it was really, really tough. And you've heard some of those stories. For our staff, again, perhaps uniquely so, because our teams travel. And so our doctors and nurses were not only going through all of the pressure and stress of working with patients who had this disease, and back in the spring, there was just so little known about it, and the fear of contracting the disease, and the fear of, are they going to have you know, PPE, and are they going to have the access to the right kind of beds for the patients and all that sort of thing. Our providers were doing that in an environment where they were away from home, and they were staying in a hotel. They weren't able to come home and see their family and have the kind of normal support systems that they have, and, you know, in a hotel. And by the way, all the restaurants were closed, and so trying to figure out just how to do things like get food when you're in a strange town, and much less in this type of environment. And so I could tell a lot of stories about just the amazing thing that our clinical staff did during this time. But it was really hard. And for our internal staff, equally so. We have, as I said, kind of 1,500 people that are kind of really responsible for coordinating, doing everything for all our teams that are in the field. And this very quickly for most of our internal staff became an almost overwhelming need. And through the spring and kind of through the early summer, for most of our internal staff, this was a 24/7 deal. There was just the response to COVID and our role in it was just tremendous. And there was a point, I remember this was, I don't know, it was probably in April or early May or something. And just so you know, so I have 3 kids, 2 of them are teenagers. And if your parents are teenagers, you'll identify with this. You know, most of the time I can't get them to come out of the room to say hello to me, you know, and which is a little bit of exaggeration. But if you had told me, hey, you're going to be locked in your house with your kids for weeks, like as a parent, I'd be like, I'll take that. Like I could spend all this time with my kids. This is, you know, this could be, you know, a nice little upside here. I remember at one point telling my wife, I was like, you know, I'm locked in my house with my kids, and I feel like I'm seeing them less than I do normally, because this for our business quickly became a 7-day-a-week, you know, all day affair. And so all of us are doing this while we're dealing with all the stresses of, you know, the unknowns of the disease and that sort of thing. And it was something that we rose to the occasion for, but it was stressful. Well, the summer comes. And June hits, and, you know, if you remember, the cases started tailing down, and in a lot of states like Georgia, they started loosening up some of the shelter in place laws. And so we in June kind of sat down as a company and really did a reforecast, because at that point felt like we had a little bit more visibility into how this is going to impact the business. And unfortunately, the forecast wasn't really positive. And we felt like we were in for a pretty difficult second half of the year. And so we had to do things that I'm sure a lot of your companies had to do as well, of you know, cutting bonuses and eliminating promotions and that sort of thing. And unfortunately for us, in the largest parts of our business, had to do a layoff. At the same time, though, we decided in June to reopen our campus, and not fully, but in Georgia was one of the states to loosen up some of the restrictions earlier. And so we decided that for those who were not in a, you know, medically vulnerable situation, that we wanted to get people coming back in a couple of days a week. We like to, you know, kind of joke that we're in a team sport. You know, what we do, it really depended on communication, that sort of thing. And we just felt like it was good for people. And so we encouraged those that could to start coming in a couple of days a week just to get some of that. Well, so we announced this, to come back to the office and all that. And I had the opportunity at the end of June to go to the beach. And given everything I just told you, how much I'm working and that sort of thing, I felt like I kind of need to go to the beach so I could see my kids. And so I got to take a few days off. And actually, it ended up not really being much of a vacation, because we actually had to do the layoffs while I was gone. And so I was unfortunately having to be engaged in that for a while. Well, we went to the beach. Well, I have a teenage daughter who has some health issues, and while we were gone, there's an episode. Some kind of things happened that um, uh, were of concern, and she has some breathing issues. And so we came home and we made the decision that as a family we really needed to quarantine, because for her to contract COVID could have been serious. So we get back from the beach. We kind of go into quarantine, and so we're not going back outside. Well, so this is now, we're talking mid-July, and if you remember what mid-July was happening, first of all, across most of the Sunbelt states, certainly across Georgia and Florida, which is where our largest offices are, new cases were just going through the roof. At one point, I think by the end of July, here in Georgia, we hit 6 times the number of new daily cases that we were experiencing at the beginning of June, when we had made some of these decisions. And so cases are going like crazy. This was also, I think, really kind of at the peak of the racial tensions in the country and some of the rioting and things that were going on. And so there was just a lot of angst around that. And then for us here in Georgia, and for us personally, our schools started announcing how they were going to go back to school. And this ended up changing later, but during this time, most of our school systems here came out and said, we're going to give you a choice. You can either go back physically, or you can do that virtually. And so all parents, and certainly us, and certainly with our daughter, we're really struggling with what do we do this. And so I came back kind of into this environment where I had left thinking, okay, we've kind of got some things settled, cases are down a little bit, we're going to be able to, kind of get back together, at least on a limited basis. We've had to make some hard decisions for the business, but we think this puts us in a good place to go forward. And I come back, and everything's changed, and changed for the worse, and gotten harder. There was a point, I remember, I was sitting in my home office as I was kind of quarantined with my family, and our marketing team had sent me, it was actually like 3 different surveys that we had done internally. We do a lot of internal surveying. And so one afternoon I was sitting, I was like, okay, I need to read the results of these surveys. And they weren't overwhelmingly negative, but it became clear to me that in reading these surveys that morale was down within our companies, that people just had a lot of angst. All the things that I just mentioned were weighing on them, in addition to the uncertainty that just comes with going through a reduction in force, and what does that mean for my job, and all those sorts of things. And I got to tell you that I'm sure everyone has probably had their low point during this. That point, probably you can look back and go, man, that was when I was at my most despondent. That was when I was just at my limit of being able to handle the things of 2020. Maybe you're there now. That moment was the low point for me. With everything that we've been through, my mental exhaustion of trying to take a vacation, not really being able to do it, coming back, dealing with all the things that we were personally, with my family, with my daughter, everything else, and then reading and seeing that this company, that we have such an amazing culture. We're so purposeful about it that I speak about it. I've written a book about it, and our company was at a low point. And it was a hard moment. I remember sitting there during that time, and I had some decision to make. I don't even know what it was. And I remember thinking, I don't even know how to think about how to make this decision, much less what to do. I don't even know, like, what's the model. I have so much uncertainty right now. I don't know what's going to happen next week, much less what's going to happen over the long term. And how do I even think about this decision? I think for all of us, I hope for you, but when we reach that low point, we have somewhere that we go for answers. I hope we all have that. For me, I'm a Christian. So for me, that's scripture. And I remember, during this time thinking, I have no idea how to even think about things. Where do I go? And so I remember thinking about, okay, well, what have I read in the Bible? And sitting there thinking, okay, so is there anything, in the Bible that talks about, how to help handle a global pandemic, racial tensions, a collapsing economy, and fear for the health of my family? And thinking like, yeah, I don't remember that section. And it dawned on me that I was looking for for something new. But there were no new chapters in the Bible. There was nothing that I hadn't read before. And it dawned on me that the principles that had always been there were the ones that were still there. And that was a real aha moment for me. So let me pause in this story for a second here, though, because I need to at this time kind of give you really quickly my view of culture, because in order to understand the rest of the story, you've got to understand this. And so I'm going to try to give you in about 90 seconds what I usually deliver in a 45-minute speech, or I devote like the first third of my book to. So I'm going to try to give you this real quickly, but it's important, I think, in understanding the rest of the story. My definition of culture is the atmosphere that results from the decisions a group makes about how to achieve its purpose. Its atmosphere is what it feels like to be a part of that group, and it feels that way because as groups we make decisions, we do certain things and we don't do certain things. It's the culture is how, as a member of that group, we know what to do, what not to do. We know how to behave. We know what's considered misbehavior. You think about these, it's like the norms of the group, and in all those decisions, all those norms, they create this atmosphere. Groups make decisions not only about how to achieve their purposes, and every group has to have a purpose in order to exist. It's not only how to achieve its purpose, but what purpose is worth pursuing to begin with. And those decisions, the purpose, how they're going to do it, all of it, they are all driven by the values and beliefs of the group, the collective values and beliefs. My definition of a value is a principle in which we place great worth. It's those principles that when we act in accordance with it, we feel whole, we feel complete. When we act against these principles, we feel personal discord and maybe even things like shame and guilt. Beliefs are these things that we hold to be true, or things that we think work. The things that just in our life, we're like, when I do this works, it gets me the results that I want. These are these truisms that just work for me. And we have those as individuals, we have them as groups, and they form our decisions. They're what drive the actions that we take, the things we choose to do and not do. They're true for groups and cultures, but they're true for us. So back to sitting in my office and at the end of July and struggling, it occurred to me that these values and beliefs that I have, the things upon which I have based my life, hadn't changed. They have endured not only throughout my life, but they've endured through a lot of people's lives, through many generations. They've withstood wars, they've withstood previous pandemics, they've withstood every conceivable hardship. And I realized that if these principles had worked in the past, then there was every reason to believe that they would work today. And one of the things that I realized is that while I felt like I had more uncertainty than I had had at any point maybe in my life before, what had really changed was not so much the amount of uncertainty, but my awareness of the magnitude of life's uncertainty. I mean, it's not that uncertainty had really increased. And if you think about it, we're always only a moment away from some great change in our life, but we normally keep those scenarios of these great changes and things that can happen. We normally keep those scenarios locked away in our subconscious. What had changed for me was that assumptions that I have about my life that I've always considered not worth considering were suddenly in my consciousness. The level of uncertainty in my life hadn't changed so much as my awareness of uncertainty had. And I don't think that I was alone in that. And so it made me realize that if that's the case, if in fact I've always dealt with uncertainty in my life, I've always been a moment away. It's just that I'm not necessarily conscious about it and these assumptions that I have around the certainty of life. If that's the case, then the question is, did the values and beliefs that have driven my decisions in the past work? In other words, another way to say that is, do the principles that drive my life, do they come from a place that is to be trusted? If the answer to that is yes, then I would submit to you that those principles will work today. They just might need to be applied in ways that I haven't had to consider before. So in early August, my daughter's health had actually started improving a little bit, and we were actually able to get a diagnosis on something for the first time in a long time, and got her into some treatment that seemed to start working. And my wife came in and pointed out, she said, "Hey, if you want to go back to the office now, I'm comfortable with you doing that." And what surprised me is that when she made me this offer, I didn't really want to go back to the office, which is strange for me. I really like being in the office most of the time. I mean, I'm in my office now. I have a beautiful, actually, office to work in. I really love being here, but I love the energy of our campus, and I love the people here. They're not just my colleagues; they're my friends, and I really enjoy this. And she would have thought, one would have thought, I would have thought that I would have been just itching to come back, and I didn't want to. And so one day I kind of forced myself, mostly just because I've probably felt guilty that we were asking other people to come back, and I wasn't there. And I got back, and when I got here, it made me realize how much I had isolated myself and the impact that isolation was having on me. And it wasn't just the physical isolation of being home, and not being around people physically and that sort of thing. During this low period, I had stopped doing as many Zoom calls and just talking to people, and had really kind of retreated to myself. And it made me realize that, and think about the fact that if that isolation had that kind of impact on me, then I bet there's a lot of other people going through similar things. The anxiety, the high levels of anxiety that we've got to deal with are pushing people into isolation. And it had a big impact. It did to me. And when I got back to the office, I was faced with the realization that during a time when our company as a whole and our associates as individuals were dealing with the most difficult period of this crisis, I had disappeared. As the leader, I had disappeared during the hardest time. And that wasn't good. Around this time, I was listening to a podcast from someone named Andy Stanley. A lot of you might know Andy. He's a pastor. He also does a leadership podcast that I find to be very good. There's a great message about leading during times of uncertainty. And there's a lot of really good things in the message, but there's something that really stuck with me at the time, where he said, as a leader, if you cannot provide certainty, then provide clarity. In other words, as a leader, if you can't say, let me tell you what's going to happen, then at least provide clarity on, here's how we're going to approach what's happening. And that stuck with me. And so at this point, I decided it was time for me to really, really heavily re-engage. I did a town hall call on Teams, mostly a video call with almost every team through our company. I started with the business lines that were struggling the most. I literally did probably 3 or 4 of these a day for about 5 weeks, and kind of had to repeat myself a lot and that sort of thing. But it was incredibly powerful. And my message to everyone was that I could not give them certainty about the future. I couldn't tell them exactly what was going to happen. I couldn't offer that. And by the way, no one could ever do that. But what I would give them is clarity about how we were going to make the decisions that we were facing. And by the way that we were going to approach those decisions is based on the same values that they've heard me talk about over and over. And I think there was a lot of comfort in that. But what they needed to know was just how we were going to apply those values to the challenges of today. Another thing that I did was I declared that we were done feeling sorry for ourselves, that it was time to start celebrating again, because despite all the challenges and uncertainties and anxiety and all that sort of thing, we have a lot of things to celebrate. There were so many things that were still going well. There were so many silver linings out of this whole thing. And so my marketing team dubbed it positively JH. And we just said, from now on, we're done talking about all the woe is me messaging. Not that we're not facing problems anymore, but we're just going to start celebrating what's coming out of this. I will tell you that over the last, I guess whether it is 3 months or now, morale has greatly improved. Business has rebounded a little bit. We've actually had a better second half of the year than we expected, which has helped. But it's made a huge difference. And what I've heard from people over and over was, thank you for being real, because what you were experiencing was what I was experiencing, that you gave us permission to think about it and to talk about it. And it made me remember the reason that I'm a part of this culture, and that those values are going to sustain through this. And it's been very transformative. So I want to kind of end here with maybe some takeaways that I hope for you, kind of maybe out of hearing my story a little bit from this year, that might be helpful. So, as I said, I speak on culture, and I give kind of same version, basically the same speech 2 or 3 times a year as I speak at different events. And I spend about 45 minutes, telling you what I gave you very quickly earlier about how values and beliefs drive culture and all that sort of thing. And I always end, or most of the time I end, with a kind of somewhat controversial, confrontative kind of statement. And I like to end that way because it gets people's attention, frankly, but I also like to end that way because it's true. And so I want to tell you this. So one of the things I'll be say is that understanding, what culture is and how your personal value beliefs and the values and beliefs of an organization drive it is hopefully interesting, but for most people, it's very unhelpful. Like there's just, for most people in my audiences that listen to me, that's really unhelpful information. And here's the reason why, is that most people don't know what they value. If you ask them, more than likely they'll make up an answer, and it will probably be, what they think you want to hear. What do you value? Oh, I value integrity, and I value family. And, the guy sitting next to him that knows him is like, that liar never spends any time with his kids, right? But it's not that we don't know what we value because we're dishonest or anything like that. It's because that for most of us, we never take the time to think deeply enough to really examine ourselves in an honest way to be able to answer a question like that. I would tell you that I think that there has never been a time when it is more important to have clarity about your values and beliefs. That clarity is important to you personally. And if you are a leader, it is so, so important organizationally. As you, as a leader, I'm sure have faced some of the tough decisions this year, and as a leader, you face the tough decisions always, and times of going like, I don't even know how to think about this decision, much less what decision to make. Having clarity of values, what are those principles that just really drive and have great words? What are the beliefs and things I think are true is the most powerful template I can give you for approaching to that. And if you've never done it before, I would encourage you to take time right now during this season to create some personal clarity about your values. And then as a leader, figure out how you can make sure your team understands those values and how you are going to apply them to all the difficult decisions ahead amidst all these times of great uncertainty. They need it. Thanks for letting me share my story, and happy to take a few questions.
Thank you, Shane. We're already getting comments just appreciating your openness and vulnerability in what you've been through this year. And I want to actually ask a preliminary question, which is, you talked a lot about what you've been through this year and how the values have been useful, but you've done so much work on this beforehand, establishing the culture and establishing the values. Can you just spend a minute sharing what you and the rest of the company went through to establish those in the first place?
Yeah, sure. And so, as I said, when I kind of went through this leadership transition with my father, and really kind of discovering and understanding culture and where it comes from, one of the things I really did was spend a lot of time of being able to both define our values, like identify what they were, and then put language behind them that we could use as a template. And so one of the great things is going through this process was that as I spoke with people and, what do you think of the values of our company and that sort of thing, there was actually great consistency. And so there was no like, oh, now these are our values, right? We've never thought about serving others before, but now we're going to. This is what's going to drive our business, right? People kind of intuitively got it, but what we did was put words behind it. And for us, we talk about, we have 3 values: others first, which is others before self; wisdom, which is not a word you hear used in business a lot, but as we talk about, doing the wise thing, because we want to do the right thing, but there's not always a right and wrong. A lot of things take wisdom. They take thinking about long-term consequences for all of our stakeholders, which is what wisdom implies. And then growth is our 3rd value that we want to and we define that as getting better, not necessarily bigger, but better. We think we have a calling to get better in everything we do. And so it's given our company kind of this template for this is how we think about decisions that we have to make.
Thank you. And Alexandria has a question. We've provided the opportunities to talk about the challenges that we're experiencing at her company, and it's been cathartic. Transitioning back to the positive, though, has been difficult. How did you gain the buy-in from your staff to change the focus back to what is good and positive?
Yeah, I think what we found was when we started doing that. So first of all, we primed the pump, right? And we kind of cheated a little bit. We went out and to our leaders and said, what's happening good in your business? And then just from a kind of corporate storytelling marketing standpoint, we just started putting these stories out there, through our various channels, to just start kind of change the narrative that they were hearing from organizational communications. But then what we did was we created platforms for people to tell these stories more organically, some technology. I tell you, one of the best things we did is we gave people these little cards that they could send to someone else about, this is something that you did for me, and just start reinforcing all this. And again, we cheated a little bit. We primed the pump, and we got some people to kind of do that, and then it just exploded. And what we found was, even though people were still personally struggling, still struggling with certain parts of the business and that sort of thing, it was just, I think it was so cathartic for everyone. It was this medicine that everyone needed. That, man, these cards started flying around. People started telling stories that we had nothing to do with, and hitting our corporate social media platforms and that sort of thing. And so we primed the pump a little bit, but then we found we had tapped into something I think people really needed.
I love that. I love priming the pump with this, because we do have that positivity in us, and I think most people do. And Mark has a question. How do you tie your behaviors to the values in your organization? You shared how you successfully reinforce them in hard times, but can you give us some examples of the behaviors and connecting that to the values you're looking for?
Yeah, so we do it through a number of ways, and I've talked about the values. The other piece of this, and if you read the book, is the beliefs, and this is where Again, these are the things that we hold to be true, or that we think work. And that's where, frankly, kind of some of the rubber meets the road in these. But we actually do a lot of training on this. The purpose of my book was written for our leaders, so they understand how these things manifest in our company, because they're our prime mechanism for spreading that culture and that organization throughout the organization. But then we measure people's performance on it. I literally just filled out a review on someone yesterday, and it was, there's all culture questions in there and that sort of thing. We layered into our training. We layered into our customer satisfaction. This has just kind of become part of it. So we do it through a number of ways, from training, expectation setting and goal setting, and then inspection as well. It's really a pretty integrated part of our organization. I hope that answers the question.
I think that was great. Thank you. And so Michael wants to ask about what you've been through this year. How were you able to recognize what the right problems were, so that you focused on what was important? Because we can all imagine there were a lot of problems. How did you figure out which ones were the right ones to focus on?
An interesting question. This is something that actually I think about in all times, and not this year. And I don't know, you guys, I'm sure everyone else has these moments where you're sitting there and you've got so much to do, and you're like, okay, what do I do next? And one of the questions I've just over the years trying to train myself when I'm in those situations, and say, what's the most important thing that I can do right now? And for me, the way that I define that is around our mission and around our we talk about like our perspectives of success and the way we define success for our company. And the closer something is to that, the higher up it rises, right? And so I would tell you, this year, probably like a lot of you, I have spent more time on kind of internal, like almost like kind of policy stuff. I mean, all the decisions around remote working and all those sorts of things that typically, like a lot of that stuff just never even gets to my level, frankly. But one of our definitions of success is through the lens of our associates. And that was so important this year, obviously. And so things that touch our associates have become really high on my priority list. So I'll give you an example of this. When I mentioned that in the summer, our school systems here started by saying you can go either or. Well, as the numbers kept getting worse, a lot of them pivoted to saying they're only going to be online. And I'm sure a lot of your school systems were the same way. Well, that created situations for a lot of our associates who have school-age kids that were just going to be impossible to manage. I mean, I don't care who you are, you cannot homeschool a 6-year-old and do your job. Like, it just, it can't happen. And so we did a few things in that. One of the things that we did was create a scholarship program, and we identified some partners who were providing resources for like tutors and that sort of thing. So anyway, it was something like, it was kind of an HR policy that, maybe before someone would have done, they would have presented me a summary. I would have said yes or no. It was something I was very personally involved in driving, because it hit to the core of what so many of our folks were dealing with. And other things that typically make it up my ladder, maybe strategy, maybe some more customer facing things, that sort of thing. This year, that just wasn't where I need to spend my time. And so it's a constant question of what's the most important thing I can do right now, what fits closest to our definition of success and our mission.
Well, that brings us right up to time. Shane, thank you so much for sharing all this wisdom. Everyone who's on this call, sorry if we didn't get to your question, but we so appreciate you being here. And Shane, I'm sorry that we're not live in an audience. We were talking beforehand that we don't get to have an applause or anything else, but I know we've got a virtual applause going right now because you really shared incredible wisdom. And I just want to thank you again. With that, I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you again next week.
Great.
Take care.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Alexander.